And good morning, everybody, to the Dutch Mentor Roundtable discussion that we have on a weekly basis. We'll post it on LinkedIn. We'll also post it on the YouTube channel so people have access to it. Today, I welcome Tammy Alvarez and Tim Gordon. We hopefully will have some other folks joining. The question of the day is that why is holding people accountable so very difficult? I will tell you, as a people leader, that's been in our faces all along. That's one of the side effects of leading people, either single or multiple. But accountability is obviously one of those things that is paramount to long-term success and to making sure that we put things into place that actually work and drive outcomes. What matters to who matters is one of my slogans, and the who matters, shareholders or our patients, our customers, or our bosses all depend on us being accountable. So having said that, I would love to hear, Tam, is your opinion or your insight in your career on accountability and how you manage that.
Thanks, Walter. Yeah, because I think you're spot on in terms of accountability. It's something everybody says, and very few people can get it right and kind of figure out that secret sauce. And I think throughout my career, I struggled with that. I think everybody does. And whenever the accountability was out of alignment, I found that there's typically, one of four things, if not more than that, that came into play. And one is our lack of ability to really establish clear goals. Because if you don't know what the finish line looks like, then it's really hard to hold people accountable to it. And so we speak in more broad terms, things get squishy. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is consistency, right? We get busy as leaders. And so sometimes we're leaning into our teams and really helping them, see the vision and get there. Other times we're distracted, whether it's budget season or some kind of crisis. And so we leave them to their own devices. And all of a sudden we come back and we're like, hey, what happened? So I think that consistency in terms of leadership is a huge thing. And when it's not there, it's harder. But the other thing too is lack of alignment. I don't know how many times I've tried to hold multifunctional teams accountable. And what one person is doing is actually undermining what another department's responsibilities are. Yeah. And so when you've got those competing priorities, you wonder why, people are not in alignment and you can't hold people accountable. Yeah. And, the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back over, is that balance between empowerment and accountability. It's like we want to give them all the responsibility, but yet we don't empower them to make those changes and to do the things they need to win. And so I think that as leaders, having the trust and making sure you've got the right people around you from an empowerment standpoint makes it a little bit easier to hold your teams accountable.
Yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense, right? Is that the golden nuggets there is the empowerment and enablement and how to apply that in the workplace without coming across as a micromanager is really, really, really key to success. I cannot agree more, right? It's a common bond and common understanding. And I always tell my teams, and a funny story is that I can give you a dartboard and say, listen, it's in my basement somewhere. And here's 3 darts and I'll go hit a bullseye. By the way, there are no lights in my basement. Right, but that's how people feel, right? They go out and they have to hit these fictitious targets that they have no idea how to get there. Forget about the skills, knowledge, and abilities they need to possess in order to be able to hit that targets, right? So do they get the right support systems? So with that said, Tim, you managed in both people as well as process in New York City Health and Hospital Organization and organizations thereafter. What has been your experience both on the receiving end as well as the giving end of accountability?
So I think, thank you, Walter, for hosting this morning. I think it's important, an important topic that we always struggle with. And as Tammy had said too, I think on the receiving end of accountability and as well as on the giving end, I think we in healthcare, I'll focus on healthcare, but it's really any industry. Things change so rapidly, whether it be financial changes, fee for service to value based, or even operational changes, regulatory changes, the huge move to telehealth. We may have a plan in place and we've mapped something out, and then we have to tell our staff now that it's going to change. And so I feel like almost in a way, whether it be someone from the front desk to nurses to doctors, things are one way one day, and then we have to pivot and move to something completely different another day, another year. And so maybe the teams then, they don't feel that they're accountable to work, and they're on the receiving end, as well as I'm on the receiving end, as hearing something from CMS, for example. They're used to now things changing so much that then they think, oh, I'm not going to follow that, or I'm not going to be consistent with that. Like Tam, you had said, I'm not going to stay consistent with what the change was last week, because I know that Tim's going to come forward based on something financial that changed, or operationally, or regulatory that changed, that now it's going to change anyway. So I'm not going to stay with that because I know it's just automatically going to change. And I think with that too, we're separate from that. And I'd be interested to hear anybody else's feedback on that, even today or after the call. We always don't hire. It's sort of like when we hire people for our organizations or our entities, we always forget the mission of the company, the organization. It's just for that moment, I need to hire for this position to fill this, and this is the time frame I need to hire for. We don't get to know the person for who they are and developing them for the mission of the entity. We instead hire them just for that position. So then, Tammy, like you were saying, it then becomes they then don't know what the bigger reality is of the organization or entity, and then there's a fight within internally that you might undermine somebody, and then mission is completely lost. So I'll add that to sort of the receiving and the giving part. Things get lost there based on change, as well as sort of how we're bringing people in and hiring for mission.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. Tammy, any comments on that?
Well, I was just made me laugh because when we think about something in terms of the, leading through change and, oh, this is going to change tomorrow, so why bother doing it? And I think that was something I was notorious for as a leader until one of my, managers finally had the guts to sit me down and say, this is what you're doing. I was like the queen of like 700 top priorities, right? So it's like, no, this is most important. No, this is most important. And when you're doing that to your teams, they're just going to take it. They're not going to say, hey, what are you doing? But when somebody finally has the courage as a leader to say, you might have to think about how you're doing this. No wonder they don't know how to be, and it's hard to hold accountable. It's like, well, which top priority that takes 100% of my time should I be accountable to today, right? So it's, I think, leading through change and as leaders having the discipline to really, avoid the shiny objects and focus on our core accountability to the organization is our responsibility, right? And when our teams are confused on what good and what a win looks like, most of the time it's our fault. So I think that's you made me snicker when you were saying that too, because I'm like, oh yeah.
Yeah, I can't agree more with that. It is that actually there's somebody told me along the way, because I too sometimes can share information, and people say it's like drinking from a fire hydrant, which really a lot of things are lost, right? So it is not about how many priorities we have. So less is more, right? And it's something we have to remember, is that, and then along the way, if the things I've read and been told about is that don't exceed the number 5. Don't have more than 5 priorities, no more than 5 focus areas, because it gets lost in translation after that. But on the second part of the conversation, I would like to shift a little bit and talk about why it is difficult. So we talked about the process we should have in place, right? We need to have a common bond, a common vision, understand, have the right people, right roles. We need to have enablement and empowerment. We need to have check-ins. We need to measure things. Now the question is, why is it on the behavioral side of the equation so difficult for people to hold others accountable? Is it because they are afraid to, somebody might not like me, or are they afraid of consequences? So again, let's do the same thing from your perspective and how you grew up in the organization, first as a doer and then as a leader. What was that like, and what insight can you bring to the table?
So do you want, and I see Michael and James here too, so I don't want to see.
Hi, sorry I'm late, everybody.
Hi, Mike, how are you?
I'm great.
Welcome to the conversation. Tammy, why don't you go first, and then Mike, maybe we'll catch up the conversation, and he will have some insight on that as well.
Right. Yeah. So, I think that the challenge with accountability is people generally do not like to have difficult conversations. Okay. And, assuming you've done everything right up to that point where you've been clear with your goals, you've been consistent, they've had the empowerment, and they don't deliver, those are difficult conversations to have. And I know the more senior I got in the organizations, the more challenging it became because you were almost afraid of a retaliatory measure, right? Like if you call BS on someone because they didn't deliver, then like the next time you screwed up, you knew you were going to get it back. And so there is that, that, okay, quid pro quo almost is like, hey, we're gonna have a sideline conversation here and how are we going to cover this versus fostering productive accountability, where it's not a gotcha culture, it's not a you point your fingers and use that as a weapon, but use that as a tool to grow and develop the organization and the leadership team. So I think people have a really hard time just really having a difficult conversation and, and being able to navigate that in terms of their own personal brand, in terms of their relationships and their stakeholder management and all of those things. And so, I think that's what I've always seen is like, okay, they're hesitant to have the conversation and they know it's going to come back to them at some point because no one's perfect. And we're always going to miss something. It's like, okay, so how bad am I going to get it back if I do that? So those were the things that I saw, and felt myself as I was moving through the ranks.
Yeah, interesting observation. Certainly can relate to that as well. Tim, any perspective on that?
Yeah, regarding the behavioral part, I think, and I even had a thought around that earlier that, when we work with teams on the professional side, it should almost be like, and it's very unlike, it's sort of very forced. I think, when you're dating somebody, when your relationship with a spouse, a partner, that doesn't happen overnight. That takes a lot of time and effort. And you just don't walk away from it, like you were saying, Tammy, where there's a bad issue. You don't want to focus on the bad, like how can we make this better? And I think that's a lot of part of the behavioral part, sitting down with teams, seeing how can we work on something together. When you hire somebody, it's very quick, you need to have it happen. You sometimes forget the mission, and you hire somebody and you really haven't fully vetted that person until they come on board. And now it's then it feels very forced. So I think it's the sitting down, getting to know people, getting to know where they may have messed up, where I may have messed up as a leader, leading by example, and sort of telling them that I take responsibility for something just as much as the team may have faulted on something. And how can we make it better instead of, like you had said, Tammy, focus on the negative. There are going to be instances where, and you don't want to micromanage either, but there are going to be instances where that may need to happen, but you don't want to focus on that first. You want to focus on more of the, how can we improve and make this better together as opposed to the punitive part. And I think people, even if it's early careerist, and I'll finish there, I think even looking back at my own career, they don't maybe have the self-confidence to speak up or to be around confrontation. And it's sort of, coaching them along around those sort of confidence things and what the workplace involves. And we've all been there before when you're forced to do something, you don't want to have to do it. And nobody wants to be in that position. Maybe we have to change our mindset around that, getting more volunteers and not forcing people to be involved with something that is maybe not under their purview.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And before I turn over to Mike, and Mike is really an expert in communications and how to say things, I'll put my 2 cents in it. Is that as I listen to both Tim and Tammy, creating a safe environment, right? We have this tendency, especially the people who really care, they are afraid, right? There's some fear in there that what is a difficult conversation going to be like, both giving and receiving. So it is absolutely essential that we create a safe environment. And that should be part of our cultural change of an organization, is that we can have these difficult conversations without the fear of losing my job or the fear of being written up. It really should be in a mindset of continuous growth and learning and having both physical and psychological safety. And the physical safety is about, listen, as in, I'm 6'5", I'm 260 pounds. I'm a big guy walking in a room. Just my sheer presence can cause people to feel a little shaky, right? So I need to think about spacing. By sitting down and keeping that space between two people, it creates a better atmosphere. Who has not received that phone call from the boss or from HR? We need to talk. And then and by the way, it's in 2 days from now. And now the person loses 48 hours of sleep and has a nervous stomach because what are we talking about? Again, psychological safety starts by making sure we properly communicate the expectation and the conversation so that both sides have an opportunity to prepare for that psychologically and do it in a safe zone. not maybe in my office, but do it in a neutral location so it's easier. And then using the platforms available in order to have a conversation and see how we can come to a common outcome to that. So with that said, obviously we can talk about the stuff for hours. Mike, I would love to have your perspective on what it is like and why it is difficult to be accountable, and how we can use our communication skills to make it a better process.
Well, I think I'd like to piggyback off of both what Tammy and Tim said, and you, Walter. Tammy talked about how it's difficult to have difficult conversations, and a lot of times we don't want to. Tim, you talked about helping those people who are more afraid to speak up find their voice to do that. But then one thing you said, Tim, that really resonated with me is we hire to solve the issue or to get the team member on, but then we don't make sure that they understand the mission and get assimilated into the culture. That's a lot of what I work with people on, because I truly believe waiting until it's time to have a difficult conversation to help each other learn how to communicate with each other is too late.
Yeah.
Because we're pushing them into an uncomfortable spot without any of the tools that they need. So when I help internal teams, especially with their communication, I always talk about, I have an assessment that helps us figure out what everybody's motivators are, what everybody's strengths are, what everybody's potential or perceived weaknesses are, and we get them talking so they understand each other and are more likely to naturally set each other up for success in those difficult conversations when things blow up.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what part of my passion, and I'll share with you and then I'll finish up. I managed a healthcare creative agency. I actually founded it and led it for 15 years. I had brilliant creative introverts and pushy, wonderful account managers. And boom, every day, you missed the deadline. Well, you asked me to do that. Creatives would not say this. I had to coach them to say this. You squeezed in 18 revisions in the time that I had to do that. And that's why I missed it. So it's your fault, but you didn't tell all of that. And that's better when everybody understands how everybody's brain operates.
Yeah, very, very good point. Excellent.
9 women can't make a baby in a month, right? The nice way to say, yeah, it's not going to happen.
I love that. I'm going to use that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Absolutely true. That's very true. Yeah. So the interesting question that comes down to it is that I have a simple equation that I use for this, that E times R equals O, right? Events happen. It's how we respond to the event that determines the outcome. We should not be reactive here. And I cannot agree with you more, Mike. This is part of the foundational education and expectation setting of an organization, and the culture of performance is about having these conversations long before they ever take place. Now, I'm high on self-accountability. If you go back to what Tammy said, is that if you have a really good vision, and there's alignment, there's understanding between the introvert, the extroverts, the people who are content and people who need to go out and sell. And then if you have clear goals set for the organization all the way down to the individual level, it is how you can get them to act like owners, to be self-accountable. And then support that self-accountability, even to the point that if there's some failures along the way, that they feel, it's safe to fail. It's safe to be, but you need to be accountable to that, right? And then as long as you have that safe zone to do so, you probably can get more out of them as individual contributors and growth than if you make it very uncomfortable for them. Very good. Tammy, any other insight on that?
Well, one of the things that keeps swinging in my head listening to the conversation, the word trust keeps showing up for me, right? And as leaders, how much time do we really spend building and earning the trust of our teams, of our business partners, as leaders within companies? How much time do we spend building trust with all of the employees and our customers, and we don't spend enough time doing that. And without that, none of this is going to work as effectively as it can. And I think when, we talk about that fail-safe environment, that involves trust. We talk about being able to, speak your mind, that involves trust. And when you don't have it, and let's face it, everyone's jaded, right? That you're only, one paycheck away from the next reorg, or, so a lot of people just have that, that disenfranchised mentality, or at least disengaged mentality. And so if you don't lean in and create a culture of trust, and that's got to start from the top, it's really hard to do any of this well. So that's, listening to everybody, I'm like, that's one thing that showed up for me.
Yeah, if I only could remember the trust equation on top of my head, I would give it to you, but it skips my mind right now. But there is one.
All right, I don't, you know me, I don't believe that letters and numbers should ever coexist. So I'll just.
That's exactly right. All right, so we have a couple minutes left on today's roundtable. Tim, any last words of reflection around this?
Yeah,
very
it
important
mentioned
topic?
something that Michael mentioned earlier about and sort of around the trust part of it, but we don't understand too much how each other's brain works. I think we don't, we give any teams we work with tools that they need to learn. In healthcare, it's lean, how to do what we can better, and produce better and produce more for more positive results. But I think we don't often focus on the softer side of things with anybody who's up and coming within organizations or entities, some of the emotional intelligence parts. I think of, again, early careerists who don't maybe know some of those things, and they're out of school, grad school, and they don't know that, or were never taught that I think we need to go back to that, understanding each other and sort of that brain work. Again, we're forced into something, and then it's like, okay, make it happen. I'll give you the tools that you need to make sure that patient revenue is coming in. But if you need to work with somebody in another department, you need to work that out yourself. Like, you're an adult, but we don't give them the adult tools in a job situation of how to make it more productive. And I think that's something we can learn to do.
Yeah, so interesting enough, the topic for next week is going to be engagement. And it is, in my world that I try to coach and teach and talk about a lot, is very four simple things. Love those you lead to context, not control, create a safe environment, and work with great focus. Number one, love those you lead is about getting to know the individual. And we need to accept that we are all very different from each other. And only when we get to that point of knowing each other to the level, and that doesn't mean I need to go back to your house to have barbecue on Friday night or to have sushi, but it is about getting to know you enough in a way that I know how I can best, reach out to you in a safe environment to make it productive, and therefore you have accountability. So very good insight there, Tim. I appreciate that, Mike.
Yeah, I think that
wisdom.
Yeah, one thing I would just say is we also have to remember, going back to the way brains work, is that, everybody's perception of accountability is different.
Different, yes.
So I may decide to take a risk and do something and miss that deadline or whatever, because some other accountability needs to be taken care of in my mind, and I am being the better employee by making that decision, even if it's not perceived the way by other folks. Unfortunately, that doesn't always get communicated, and it still looks like a failure.
I think perception management will be a topic in the very near future, because that is oh boy, it's difficult.
That's one of my favorites, Walter, because that's, a lot of the senior executives that I've coached have been elevated up to those positions, but have no idea how they're being perceived.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you can join us for that talk as well. And it certainly is a hot topic for everybody to talk about. Thank you, Tammy.
Well, I think, parting shot is, remember that yes doesn't necessarily mean agreement. It means understanding. So we've got to take the extra step when we hear the word yes, not to say, okay, we're good. And, you go for it and only come find out that nothing got done, right? It's like, well, when you dig in a little bit, you realize, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Don't necessarily agree. So I think as leaders, it's our responsibility to make sure that we dive in further and make sure that we really do have agreement and consensus before, running to that next meeting and, jamming up back to back to make sure that our teams have what they need. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the words of wisdom. I think that my parting is, it starts with clarity, right? It is, we need to have clear goals, clear expectation. We need to create a safe environment. We need to make sure that people know and understand that nobody's out to get them. It's about learning and growing together as a team, and to be open-minded, right? To be flexible, to be agile, to build that trust bond over time. Only when you have that, you can have true accountability. And my philosophy is always that if you work with people, they will fire themselves, right? If the ultimate accountability, if they are not non-compliant and not willing to go along with it. But that's certainly another topic for another day. Again, thank you all three of you for joining the conversation today. I look forward to continue our dialogue once a week, every Thursday at 11 o'clock. We'll pick a topic. We'll have some invitees as well as people can join us for the conversation. Again, learning together is always stronger than just reading a book or listening to another Blinkist. So it's fun to be with all of you, Tammy and Mike and Tim. I'll make sure we post on LinkedIn. All three of you are wonderful coaches and individuals, and look forward to connecting again in the near future. Thank you and have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Bye,
You too,
everybody.
everyone.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.